How does it all look? Is my hair good? It's all
There is no list. We'll start with that.
Understanding of the royal family.
Well, that's just not true.
I didn't know much about him.
Well, that's just not true. I'm not sure exactly what the outcome will be, but definitely not good.
I would never have introduced them. It would never have occurred to me to introduce them. I couldn't imagine them being two chalk and cheeses would never. I mean, for real, there's nothing there to connect them. I would say very central to that, yes.
Was he part of the work around that, or just in support of you?
He supported me to help them, but then I think he may have tried to use that to insert himself in some way.
Some stories don't disappear because they aren't true. They disappear because too many powerful people make sure they do. From behind prison walls, fragments have reportedly begun to surface. Never full confessions, never loud accusations, just hints, names, timelines. Enough to remind anyone listening that not everything buried stays buried forever. And tucked inside those fragments is a private incident that allegedly unfolded over 3 days, far from palace walls, far from cameras, aboard a luxury yacht in the south of France. A moment that allegedly spiraled into a pregnancy, an infection, and a medical outcome so severe it changed a life permanently. At the time, it meant nothing to the world. Years later, the woman at the center of it would walk straight into the heart of the royal family itself. This is not a story built on opinions, it's a story built on memories people hoped would fade away. And to understand why it still matters, you have to go back before headlines, before titles, before anyone knew her name. February 2002. Nice, France. The harbor glowed under soft lights, water gently rocking expensive dreams tied to polished docks. Among the yachts sat one owned by a Greek millionaire, private, selective, carefully curated. This wasn't a public event. This wasn't chance. The guest list was controlled and everyone knew why they were there. Prince Andrew was coming. At that time, Andrew moved easily through Europe, slipping between elite circles like it was second nature. His presence alone shifted rooms before he even spoke. On the yacht, glasses clinked, music floated low, and conversations carried an unspoken understanding that this night mattered more than it appeared. Some guests would later admit they had no idea they were standing at the edge of a story that would echo for decades. And then there was Meghan. Young, observant, fully aware of where she was and who was about to step aboard. She wasn't there by mistake, and she wasn't there to blend into the background. As the evening stretched on, the mood subtly changed. Conversation slowed, eyes drifted toward the dock. Then Andrew arrived. No announcement, none was needed. The second he stepped aboard, laughter softened, postures straightened. Power has a way of doing that without asking permission. Andrew appeared relaxed, almost at home. He greeted familiar faces, accepted drinks, smiled easily. This was not a man unsure of his place. And almost immediately, Meghan noticed him. She didn't hesitate, she didn't wait. According to those who were there, she moved directly toward him, confident, deliberate, placing herself exactly where she would be seen. Within minutes, they were talking. Within moments, they were no longer strangers. People nearby would later remember how fast it happened, how naturally the conversation flowed, how closely she leaned in, how his attention drifted away from everyone else. This wasn't subtle, and it wasn't accidental, because before most guests fully registered what was unfolding, Meghan had already made her move. Less than half an hour after Andrew's arrival, she was no longer standing beside him. She was sitting on his lap, whispering into his ear. Guests noticed, crew noticed. The moment was brief, but impossible to miss. Then came the stairs. Witnesses later said the two moved together toward the lower deck, down a narrow staircase that led away from the party, away from the music, and into private cabins hidden below. And once they disappeared, they were gone. Not just for the night. For 3 full days, Andrew and Meghan reportedly remained inside a single cabin. Food trays arrived at one door again and again. Drinks followed. Crew members remembered the silence. No casual appearances, no accidental run-ins, just a closed door that stayed closed. When Meghan finally emerged, she appeared changed. Calm, confident, almost triumphant. One person recalled her smiling as she said she had found her prince. At the end of the third day, they reportedly left the yacht together. No announcements, no explanations. The gathering simply dissolved, leaving behind a memory that refused to fade. After nice, reality snapped back into place. Andrew returned to London, back into the structure and protection of royal life. His schedule filled, his world tightened. Whatever had happened on that yacht now sat oceans away behind palace gates. Meghan, however, believed something real had begun. According to sources, she tried to stay in contact. Calls, messages, attempts filled with the assumption that the connection mattered, that 3 days below deck hadn't been meaningless. But nothing came back. Eventually, the calls reached the palace. And that's where power became visible. According to those familiar with the situation, instructions were clear. Do not put her through. No explanations. No conversations. Just silence. For Meghan, the door she thought had opened slammed shut without warning. Whatever had happened was now being treated as if it never existed. But silence doesn't erase impact. It only delays consequence. According to people connected to the yacht circle, Meghan wasn't calling for closure. She was calling because she believed Andrew needed to hear something urgent. Not long after the yacht docked, she reportedly told those close to her that she believed she was pregnant and that Andrew was the father. The calls that followed weren't casual, they were pressing, time-sensitive, desperate, and still nothing came back. No acknowledgement, no response, just absence. With each passing day, the reality set in. Whatever she believed existed had no place in Andrew's world. According to sources, faced with isolation and silence, Meghan made a decision alone, one that would permanently alter her life. The pregnancy was reportedly ended without support, without explanation, without closure, and from that moment, the story shifted. What followed was reinvention, new circles, new proximity to influence. For a brief time, she moved among American political elites, power without silence. But something went wrong. According to accounts, a brief relationship during this period exposed her to a serious infection. What initially seemed manageable quickly escalated. Doctors intervened. By April 2002, the situation was reportedly critical. A hysterectomy was performed, no headlines, no public discussion, just a permanent medical outcome that quietly closed a chapter forever. Those close to the situation later described it as a turning point, not just physically, but emotionally. A moment where ambition hardened, where silence turned into fuel, years passed, life moved forward, and then unexpectedly, Meghan entered the royal family not through whispers, but openly, officially, publicly. Inside palace walls, she encountered many faces, but according to observers, there was one figure who never fully met her gaze: Andrew. Those who watched described something unmistakable: avoidance, stiffness, a discomfort that cut through practiced royal composure. They didn't speak openly, they didn't confront the past, they didn't need to. And then came the whispers again. Not loud, not provable. Just murmurs resurfacing from places they were never supposed to reach. Old yacht circles, old names, old timelines, the kind of fragments that don't accuse but don't absolve either. Enough to reopen doors people thought were sealed forever. What unsettled insiders most was not the content of those whispers, but the timing. They emerged just as the royal family faced unprecedented scrutiny, just as silence stopped working the way it used to. In an age where everything resurfaces eventually, the past no longer stays buried just because someone powerful wants it to. According to those who believe Maxwell's hints were deliberate, they weren't meant to explode, they were meant to linger, to remind, to signal that some stories still exist, even if they're never fully told, especially if they're never fully told. And Meghan, whether she acknowledged it or not, stood as living proof of that persistence. She represented something uncomfortable: continuity, a line connecting who Andrew was in private spaces to who he had to be in public ones. That kind of connection terrifies institutions built on controlled narratives. What's striking is how carefully everything remained unspoken. No confrontations, no dramatic scenes, just avoidance layered over years. That's not not how innocence behaves. Innocence doesn't flinch. It doesn't need distance. Silence, on the other hand, needs maintenance. It needs effort, and effort leaves traces. People often ask why none of this came out sooner, louder, clearer, but that question misunderstands how power protects itself. Stories don't disappear because they're false. They disappear because they're inconvenient, because acknowledging them would fracture carefully constructed images, because denial is easier than reckoning. Yet, even denial has an expiration date. According to sources, the past followed Meghan quietly, shaping her instincts, her defenses, her hunger for control over her own narrative. Once you've been shut out without explanation, you learn never to rely on doors opening again. You build your own exits. You make sure silence can't corner you twice. And Andrew, he carried the opposite burden. The knowledge that one person in his orbit remembered him without titles, without shields, without protection, someone who had seen him in a space where power didn't need to perform. That kind of memory doesn't fade, it waits. This is why the story refuses to settle. Not because of scandal alone, but because it exposes something deeper. The imbalance between those who can move on untouched and those who carry consequences in their bodies, their choices, their futures. A 3-day encounter became a lifelong echo. And when Maxwell allegedly referenced it years later, she wasn't reopening a scandal. She was acknowledging a reality that never closed. A reminder that silence is not the same as resolution, that avoidance is not the same as innocence, that some histories don't need witnesses, they survive because the people involved remember. What happened in Nice didn't end on that yacht. It didn't end with unanswered phone calls, it didn't end with surgery or palace gates closing. It stretched forward, quietly influencing decisions, shaping behaviors, haunting interactions that outsiders could never fully decode. Because power may delay reckoning, but it cannot erase it. And some stories don't need to be shouted to be true, they only need to be remembered. They only need to be remembered. They only need to be remembered.